Yo, it is Multiplier, and right now we're going to review iZotope Ozone 6. It is the replacement for iZotope Ozone 5. Funny how they did that, right? 5 to 6. And it's basically like an all-in-one mastering suite type thing. It's basically one plugin that does all your mastering needs. And it's really, really good, basically. But what I'm going to try and do is try to review it from two sides. One side, is it the best mastering plugin available? And the other side, is it a good upgrade from Ozone 5? Because it's gone from 5 to 6. So personally, I've been using iZotope Ozone 5 for a few years now, and it is amazing. And Ozone 6 is a good improvement. But let's get down into the important details of, is it good? Why is it good? All that kind of cool stuff. So basically, the reason why I use iZotope Ozone, and it's for one reason exclusively, it does a lot of cool stuff, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of really, really cool stuff. But the one reason why I only use iZotope Ozone 5, and now, well, I'll continue to use iZotope Ozone 6, it's because of one algorithm. And that algorithm is IRC -- was basically intelligent release control free, and it is basically, it's the algorithm Ozone uses, their most advanced algorithm, to do the limiting, which is the most important part of the mastering process. So your mastering is typically stuff like EQ, some dynamic stuff with some compression. You've got stuff like exciting, maybe even some reverbs. You can do a few different stuff like stereo widening, but the limiter is the one thing that really you need to get right, and IRC3 is so good. It's better than anything else. Like literally once a year I will download every mastering plugin, every limiter, and I'll just literally spend a weekend just trying out all the different limiters and trying out to make sure that at any given year I'm using the best limiter. And Ozone is always by far the best. And it's all down to IRC3. It's a CPU hog, don't get me wrong, but when you get to mastering, who cares about that, right? You want the best limiter possible, and that is IRC3. Because you can just crank it so hard and it doesn't ruin the sound. That's the best thing about it. But let's give you some examples, and then I'll kind of explain some of the other cool stuff about iZotope Ozone, what's new in Ozone 6, stuff like that. But to give you an idea about how hard you can crank it, so I've got a unreleased, currently unmastered track, work in progress, titled Dinosaur Twerk. It's actually finished, but this is the drop section. Sounds like this. Pretty rad. So let's crank IRC3 and show you how it works. So we'll just get rid of the EQ and the dynamics modules by doing some clicking. So we've got the maximizer, we've clicked IRC3, and then let's pull down on this threshold and see how far we can go before the whole thing explodes. You can probably crank it to maybe there. Because I'm wearing a hat right now, it's kind of quite hard to hear the details, but you get the idea. You can crank it super hard and the whole thing just doesn't fall apart. And it's all down to what's called intelligent release control. So normally with a limiter, there's like a fixed release. So as it limits and the limiter falls off, it's kind of, there's a release to it, if you imagine what's going on. And this kind of uses intelligence from some sort of aliens or something to figure out exactly how best to do it. And it just works so well. Literally, you've got to try this thing. That didn't do it justice. You've got to download the trial and just crank stuff into it, and then like A/B it compared to what other limiters can do. And it's unbelievable. It really, really is. But that's the reason why I use Ozone. But let's show you some other cool stuff about it. So a lot of you have been using Ozone 5 because it's pretty much the industry standard kind of mastering thing. What's the differences between 5 and 6? Well, the first thing that jumps out at you is Ozone 6 is beautiful. I mean, just look at these kind of EQ things. Oh, look at those colors. And it may sound a bit trivial that it looks beautiful. How will that affect my sound? Yes, it looking beautiful doesn't affect the sound, but it just makes it a lot nicer to use. And when you're spending a while using something, if it inspires awesomeness because it just looks beautiful and feels beautiful, then you have a lot more fun using it and you can be more creative. So I think although it is beautiful, I think it genuinely makes it better because it's nicer, and that's good, right? Nice things are nice. That's why we buy nice shit. But yeah, it's beautiful. That's the first thing that jumps out at you. One of the things that really kind of jumped out at me has been one of the cool things that not many people have been talking about kind of Ozone 6. Typically, when people talk about Ozone 6, the cool thing they mention is this dynamic EQ. So let's pull back on the maximizer a bit. So for a start, you can move the modules around just by dragging. That's pretty cool. Before you had to click the little graph button and it was a bit of a headache. But you can just drag the modules about. Dynamic EQ is basically, it's almost like, it's like a compressor and dynamics, but all kind of rolled into one. So let's give you a bit of an example. So let's play some stuff through. If we, say, pull this down, so have a look at basically this blue line, this kind of light blue line is with the actual EQ that's happening. And you've got this kind of like threshold and some attack and release. So it's almost like a multi-band compressor, except instead of dealing with bands, you're dealing with kind of EQs and stuff. So it's like an EQ that kind of moves about. It's like dynamic. It's kind of quite hard to explain. It's easy just to kind of visualize. So you kind of choose the point, you choose the width, you choose like the threshold and stuff. But you get the idea. It's like EQ that adapts. So if you have a peak that, it's quite common. Let's say someone sends me like a master and there's like, when a certain thing hits, like a certain percussive thing, it might cause a really annoying resonance. So I want to kind of tone back that resonance at a particular point. But what I don't want to do is just get rid of that particular frequency when that like thing that's hitting isn't there, if that makes sense. So this is kind of does EQ when you need it, but gets out the way when you don't. It's kind of the whole vibe. It's pretty cool. And not to mention, it bounces around. It looks pretty cool. It's like, look at that, bouncing around. So that's the thing people talk about mostly when they talk about Ozone 6 as being the kind of the awesome new feature. And I really like it. But for me, the absolute kind of under the hood, it's not really under the hood, but the thing that people seem to be ignoring that I think shouldn't get ignored is the stereoize. Not just because they've given it a great name, which is like a multiplier word, stereoized. Let's make it more stereo. Stereoize. It's just really, really, really good. And the best thing to do is to demonstrate it on something that isn't a full track. So let's find a mono drum sample. I should have prepared this in advance. Simple hi-hat. Let's go for a reel. Is that mono? I can't even hear right now. Headphones are being whack. Just drag out audio clip. That's not mono at all. We should have picked a mono one. Let's find a mono. Right, so in the break, I basically found a mono sound because I didn't do any preparation, but we've got the mono sound now, so it's great. It's basically a hi-hat from Capston's amazing sample pack, Dust, Dirt, Crackle or something, and it sounds like this. So let's say we got a super mono sound, but we're like, oh no, we want it to be wide. Well, you can do that with stereoize. Now, normally what you do in the situation is you do some sort of weird Haas effect, or you kind of delay one side to the other, so you create the illusion of width. But then you get this weird phasey effect when you kind of combine it to mono, and it sounds horrible. But stereoize, you can some sort of alien magic gets around that. So we've got our sound. In fact, it probably helps if we drag on. So it's pretty worth mentioning as well, if you have the advanced version of Ozone, you can drag out the individual modules as individual things. So for example, in this situation, if we want to make it wider, we can do it. We can just drag out the imager module by itself. So double click, don't want a preset. So we've got our sound. We can use stereoizer. So we'll just get rid of all the bands. So we'll just deal with one band. If we turn it on and then move this to the side, oh, we need to change this up. So let's just drag it up to the top. Wow, it's wide, look at that. So by dialing in this kind of number here and then this here, because we're only dealing with one band, we can make it wide or not wide. Look, so not wide. Oh, turn it on. Wide, look at that. And it's literally amazing. I mean, it's properly good. Because you can make anything wide and it doesn't get this stupid phasey effect. I've honestly no idea how you do it, iZotope. Use some sort of witchcraft, aliens or something, but it makes it so wide, it's so good. And that's probably my favorite kind of thing that people aren't really talking about that's new in Ozone 6. You had a similar sort of thing in Ozone 5, but it wasn't anywhere near as good. This stereoize does it without this weird phasey effect. I don't know how it's magic, complete magic. But the cool thing about that is it is great on the master as well, because I do like widening things in the master, and you can do it multi-band. So for example, if it's on an actual mastering, in the case of actually mastering a full track, you might say widen the highs, but you might not want to widen the lows. That's kind of a typical thing to do. So you can do that on multi-band, but if you just want to widen any old sound, you can do that. Even if you don't have the advanced version of Ozone 6, you can still just drag out Ozone 6, do a click, and then just get rid of all the modules you don't want. So you can just close them all down, click the one you want, do a click like Imager, and then do your stereoizing. So that is one of my favorite things. It was really, really cool. And of course, Ozone 6, as you'd expect from a top class mastering plugin, does do all your good stuff. The dither is really, really good. Saying that, lots of the top mastering plugins do really, really good dithers. But yeah, the Mbit Plus dither is really, really good. So I do all my dithering in Ozone. It's pretty sweet. That's this cool thing. I haven't really had a good chance to play around with it myself yet. Where for the bypass, it does this kind of gain match thing. How do they describe it? Wait, let's bring this up. They've got enables Ozone to automatically match effective gain and bypass. So you know when you're doing processing, but then it affects the gain. So you're like, oh, did that processing, does it sound better or worse because it's louder or quieter? I have a hard time differentiating. If you hit bypass and then hit that button, it will kind of compensate for all that. It's pretty cool. That's one of the advantages of Ozone 6. What else is new in Ozone 6? Going back to the IRC3 algorithm, which is the best algorithm in the universe, it has this thing called Transient Emphasis. I haven't really had a good chance to play around with that, but that sounds pretty cool. So I'm going to say check that out. But even if you don't play around with Transient Emphasis, the reason why you want to use Ozone is purely for IRC3. It's literally ridiculous. Like Transient Emphasis, I'm sure makes it better. I haven't had a good chance to play around with it. Maybe it makes more sense for some genres than others, but yeah, just the IRC3 algorithm is so good. I highly, highly recommend it. And you got stuff like mono buttons, and I suppose the other new stuff that some people may want to know about Ozone 6, the Equalizer, they've changed some of the modeling they've been doing for some of the EQ curves, so they sound nicer. They've got some analog vibe, and they do this weird thing with phase. So when you do some like, I don't even know how it works, but just some cool thing. It's got like, where's it gone? How do I make that meter come up? I don't know, it's some sort of magic. But yeah, it does something with phase, because sometimes when you do EQing in some situations, you get weird stuff happening with the phase. You got to be on digital. So yeah, maybe because the analog modeling kind of combats it a bit. So if you're doing digital EQing, you can do stuff with the phase. Must admit, I haven't had a good chance to play around with that. Don't know how well it works. Mixed phase response of current band. So you can kind of, because part of the arguments why you want to use analog is you get weird phasey stuff happening with EQing sometimes with digital. This theoretically combats it, which is pretty cool, I think. But yeah, that's been a long, in-depth Ozone 6 review. I give it 10 out of 10 because it is sweet. Highly, highly recommend it. As I say, it does a load of cool stuff. Yeah, compressor, good. The Exciter is really, really good. It has some new modes in Ozone 6, triode and dual triode. Again, haven't had a good chance to play with that. A button that you want to know about that I think they should talk about more and that I think should be turned on by default is the oversampling mode. And basically when you're doing exciting, this kind of saturation in the mastering stage, or even doesn't have to be a mastering stage, exciting is kind of saturation or distortion. If you turn on oversampling, it sounds better. And yes, it uses more CPU, but when I'm doing mastering, I don't care about CPU because I'm only doing mastering. I want my masters to sound as good as possible. So definitely when you do your final export, at least make sure oversampling is turned on, because you might as well turn it on. It's just CPU cycles. And when you're doing exporting, just go have a coffee. Who cares? I care, but I don't. Oversampling, make sure it's turned on. I've been Multiplier. That's been a fantastic review of iZotope Ozone 6. I'd say if you have iZotope Ozone 5, get it. If you don't, still get it.